The Last Man. The crystalline spires of Lumaria pierce the violet sky like frozen music, their surfaces refracting the light of 3 moons into rainbow cascades. Commander James Chen had seen countless alien worlds during his years with the Terran Exploration Corps, but nothing quite like this. As his escape pod's viewport frosted over with crystal-laden atmospheric particles, he fought to maintain control of the rapidly descending craft. "Come on, hold together," he muttered, wrestling with the controls as warning lights flashed across the console. The pod's hull creaked ominously as it plunged through layers of crystalline clouds. His research vessel, the TES Hawking, was nothing but debris in high orbit now, victim to an unexpected meteor storm that had forced him to evacuate. Of the 12 escape pods launched, his sensors could only track his own. The ground rushed up to meet him, a vast plain of luminescent crystal formations stretching to the horizon. James braced for impact as the pod's emergency systems fired, crystalline dust billowing around him as the craft skidded to a halt. For several long moments, he sat perfectly still, listening to the ping of cooling metal and the soft chime of crystal particles settling on the hull. His suit's atmospheric analyzer beeped, displaying results that made him blink in surprise. The air was breathable, remarkably Earth-like, with slightly higher oxygen content. After running the analysis 3 times to be sure, James unsealed his helmet. The air that filled his lungs carried a strange sweetness, like breathing in starlight. As James emerged from the pod, his boots crunched on crystal gravel. The landscape before him seemed to pulse with its own inner light, crystal formations growing in impossible geometric patterns that defied natural geology. His handheld scanner detected signs of advanced civilization nearby, but something about the readings seemed off. He hadn't taken more than a dozen steps when he heard them, musical tones that couldn't have come from the crystals. James turned slowly, raising his hands in the universal gesture of peace as figures emerged from behind a towering crystal formation. His breath caught in his throat. They were humanoid, but clearly alien. Their skin seemed to be composed of living crystal, transparent in some places and opaque in others, with intricate patterns of light flowing beneath the surface. All of them were female, or at least appeared so by human standards. Their eyes were large and faceted like gemstones, reflecting the ambient light in mesmerizing patterns. "I come in peace," James said clearly, keeping his hands visible. "I'm Commander James Chen of the Terran Exploration Corps. My ship was damaged, and I had to make an emergency landing." The crystalline beings exchanged looks, their skin patterns flickering with changing colors. One stepped forward, taller than the others, with patterns that seemed more complex. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through crystal chimes. "You speak, but you are unlike any being we have ever encountered." Her head tilted as she studied him. "Your surface is soft, not crystalline. And your form," she gestured to the others. "Sisters, observe. It is different from ours in ways I cannot comprehend." James realized with growing amazement that they had never seen a male before, of any species. "I'm what my people call a man," he explained carefully. "Where I come from, there are 2 biological sexes, male and female." This announcement caused a ripple of flickering lights to pass through the group, their crystal skin pulsing with what James assumed was excitement or surprise. The leader stepped closer, her faceted eyes studying him intently. "I am First Singer Lyra," she said. "You are now in the domain of the luminary. Your presence here is unprecedented. Our histories speak of a time when others visited our world, but that was many generations past. We had begun to believe we were alone in the cosmos." "There are many civilizations among the stars," James said. "My people, humanity, are explorers. We seek to learn about other cultures, to exchange knowledge and build bridges between worlds." Laura's crystal skin shimmered with multiple colors. "Knowledge. Yes, you must have much to teach us, as we have much to learn about you." She gestured to the others. "We will take you to the Crystal Spire. Our council must hear of this." As they led him toward the towering crystals in the distance, James couldn't help but marvel at their construction. What seemed like natural formations from a distance revealed themselves to be intricately designed structures, their crystalline surfaces alive with flowing data and energy. "Your technology," he said, "it's unlike anything I've ever seen. The integration of crystal matrices with biological systems." "We are the crystal, and the crystal is us," Lyra explained. "It has been so since the Great Change, when our ancestors chose to adapt to this world rather than perish upon it. But speak no more for now, Commander James Chen. Save your words for the Council. They will have many questions, the first man to walk our world in living memory." James followed in thoughtful silence, his mind racing. The Great Change. Chosen adaptation. There was clearly far more to the luminary than met the eye. As they approached the crystal spire, its surface rippling with welcome, James couldn't shake the feeling that his crash landing might not have been entirely accidental. Something had drawn his pod to this specific location, a faint signal he'd barely noticed at the time. The mystery of the luminary was just beginning to unfold, and James Chen, last man in a world of crystal women, was about to discover just how deep that mystery went. Strange new world. The crystal spire soared impossibly high, its faceted surfaces thrumming with data streams that pulsed like bioluminescent veins. James stood before the Luminary High Council, 12 crystalline figures seated in a perfect circle, their forms more elaborate and intricate than any he'd seen so far. The chamber itself seemed alive, responding to the Council's subtle movements with shifts in light and resonance. "You claim to be an explorer," spoke the chief counselor, her voice carrying harmonics that made the very air vibrate. "Yet you arrived in violence, your vessel destroyed in our skies. How can we trust your intentions?" James met her multifaceted gaze steadily. "The destruction of my ship was an accident, a meteor storm that our sensors failed to detect in time. If I meant harm, I wouldn't have come alone in a damaged escape pod." "Perhaps," another counselor chimed in, her crystal form shimmering with deep blues. "But your very existence challenges everything we know. Our records speak of a time before the Great Change, when our people took different forms. Some resembled you with soft exteriors, but that knowledge is fragmentary, corrupted by time." First Singer Lyra, standing beside James, stepped forward. "Honored Council, I believe the Commander's arrival presents an unprecedented opportunity. If he truly represents a spacefaring civilization, we could learn much from each other." The chamber resonated with musical tones as the Council communicated in frequencies beyond human hearing. James waited, studying the intricate patterns of light flowing through the walls. His scientific mind was already cataloging the incredible achievements before him. The seamless blend of biological and crystalline systems, the apparent ability to store and transmit data through light itself. Finally, the chief counselor spoke again. "Commander Chen, we will permit you to stay, under First Singer Lyra's supervision. You will be given access to certain areas of our city for study, but you must also submit to our examinations. We must understand what you are." "Agreed," James said, "though I have conditions of my own. I need to attempt contact with my people, to let them know I survived, and I want to understand your civilization, not just observe it." A ripple of color passed through the council members. "Your terms are acceptable," the chief counselor declared. "First Singer Lyra will see to your needs. But be warned, Commander, there are places in our city you must not go, questions you must not ask, for your own safety and ours." As James followed Lyra from the chamber, he could feel the weight of unspoken histories pressing down on him. The Luminari were hiding something about their past, about the mysterious Great Change that had transformed them into crystalline beings. "Your living quarters have been prepared," Lyra said, leading him through corridors that shifted and flowed around them. "We've attempted to accommodate your biological needs, though our understanding is limited." The room they entered was a stark contrast to the crystal architecture outside. Soft, synthesized materials formed a bed and seating areas, while a separate chamber contained what appeared to be basic hygiene facilities. "How did you create all this so quickly?" James asked, running a hand over the bed's surface. "We remember more than we speak of," Lyra replied cryptically. "Now, if you're willing, I have questions of my own." Over the next several hours, they engaged in a fascinating exchange of information. James explained basic human biology, society, and technology, while Lyra revealed aspects of luminary culture. They were a harmonious society, she explained, sharing thoughts and emotions through crystalline resonance. The concept of conflict was almost foreign to them. "But surely you have disagreements," James pressed. Different viewpoints on how to progress. Lyra's form flickered with what he was learning to recognize as discomfort. "There are discordant frequencies. Some believe we should remain isolated, others wish to reach for the stars again. Your arrival has strengthened both sides." As night fell, the crystal city transformed. Bioluminescent patterns painted the spires in ethereal light, while crystalline chimes created a symphony that seemed to echo the movements of the 3 moons overhead. James stood at his window, mesmerized by the display. A soft chiming interrupted his reverie. "Commander," Lyra's voice carried a note of urgency. "There's something you need to see." She led him through lesser-used passages, their surfaces duller and less responsive. They descended into what appeared to be older sections of the city, where the crystal formations were more chaotic, less refined. "These areas are restricted," Lyra explained, her voice low. "But I believe you need to understand." She pressed her hand to a crystalline surface, sending pulses of light through ancient circuits. A hidden door arised open. Inside, James found himself in what could only be described as a museum of the forbidden. Preserved specimens and artifacts told the story of a people who had once been much like humans, flesh and blood, male and female. But something had happened, something catastrophic that had forced them to change. "The great change wasn't a choice, was it?" James asked softly. Lyra's crystal form dimmed slightly. "No, it was survival. Our sun was dying, poisoning our world with radiation. The only way to survive was to become something else entirely. But the process," she trailed off, her lights pulsing with what might have been grief. "Not everyone survived the transformation, and those who did could no longer reproduce as before. So you found another way." "We learned to grow new luminary from the crystal itself, imprinting consciousness and memories. But each generation becomes more crystalline, less organic. Some fear we are losing touch with what we once were." James stared at a preserved specimen of a male luminary, understanding dawning. "That's why my arrival has caused such discord, and a reminder of what was lost." "And perhaps," Lyra added, her form brightening, "a key to what might be regained. But we must be careful. There are those who would see you as a threat to our way of life, and others who would use you for their own purposes." As they left the hidden chamber, James's mind raced with implications. The Luminari weren't just an alien civilization, they were a people in crisis, teetering between evolution and extinction. And somehow, he had crash-landed at exactly the right moment to potentially change their fate. But one question nagged at him: had his crash really been an accident, or had someone among the Luminari engineered his arrival, seeking to catalyze change in a society that was slowly crystallizing into stasis? The answer, he suspected, would shake the foundations of this crystal world if he lived long enough to discover it. Hidden truths. The crystal laboratory hummed with energy as James underwent yet another round of examinations. Luminary scientists moved around him, their forms casting prismatic shadows on the walls. 3 weeks had passed since his arrival, and each day brought new discoveries and new questions. "Remarkable," murmured the chief scientist, Sarah, her crystalline form pulsing with excited frequencies. "Your cellular structure, it's so adaptable, yet so fragile compared to ours." She held up a holographic display of his DNA, the double helix spinning in shimmering light. "Fragile is relative," James replied, flexing his arm as sensor crystals detached from his skin. We may not be living crystal, but humans are surprisingly resilient. Sarah's faceted eyes flickered with interest. Yes, your ability to heal, to change without complete reformation, it's fascinating. So different from our own processes. But James was only half listening. His attention was drawn to a familiar figure hurrying past the laboratory's transparent walls. Lyra, moving with an urgency that set off warning bells in his mind. Over the past weeks, she had become more than just his guide. She was his ally in understanding the deeper mysteries of Luminary society. "I think we're done for today," he said, standing up despite Sarah's musical protest. The scientist's crystals chimed with disappointment, but she didn't stop him as he headed for the door. He caught up with Lyra in a seldom-used corridor, its crystal surfaces dulled with age. "What's wrong?" he asked without preamble. Lyra's form flickered with agitation. "The Resonance Council has convened an emergency session. There have been incidents, crystal decay in the outer sectors. It's spreading faster than ever before." James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crystal environment. He had seen the decay himself, patches of crystal that had lost their luster, their ability to carry the light-based data that was the lifeblood of Luminary society. But there was something more in Lyra's manner, a tension that spoke of deeper concerns. "Show me," he said. They took a crystal transport to the outer sectors, where the city's elegant spires gave way to more utilitarian structures. Here, the signs of decay were impossible to miss. Entire sections of crystal had gone dark, their once vibrant surfaces now dull and lifeless. "It's not just the structures," Lyra said softly. "Some of our people, their forms are showing similar signs of degradation, the younger generations especially." James ran his hand over a darkened crystal surface, his scientific mind racing. "Your society depends on crystal resonance for everything: communication, reproduction, memory storage. If the crystal matrix is breaking down, we face extinction," Lyra finished. "But that's not the worst of it." She pressed her hand to a nearby wall, sending a pulse of energy through ancient circuits. A hidden doorway appeared, leading down into darkness. The passage took them deep beneath the city, to a chamber that hummed with a different kind of energy. Here, ancient machinery merged with crystal technology in ways that made James' eyes hurt to look at. At the center stood a massive crystalline structure, its surface covered in what appeared to be mathematical equations rendered in light. "This is the heart," Lyra explained, "the source of the great change, and the template for all luminary transformation. It's failing." James studied the equations flowing across the crystal surface, his eyes widening as he began to understand. "This isn't just a transformation device," he said. "It's a quantum computer, running simulations of genetic algorithms. Your ancestors didn't just change your physical forms, they rewrote your entire species at the quantum level." "Yes," Lyra's form dimmed, "but the calculations are beginning to break down. Each new generation of luminary is less stable than the last. We're becoming too perfect, too crystalline. We're losing the chaos that makes life possible." "That's why I'm really here, isn't it?" James turned to face her. "Someone among your people calculated that you needed an injection of organic chaos, natural DNA that could help stabilize the crystal matrix." Lyra's form flickered with what might have been embarrassment. "The meteor storm that destroyed your ship, it wasn't entirely natural. A faction within our society, led by the Seventh Counselor, believed we needed outside intervention. They used the city's ancient defense systems to create the storm, hoping to force a landing. They risked my life, the lives of my entire crew, on a theory. They were desperate. We all are. But not everyone agrees with their methods. The purist faction believes any contact with organic life will only accelerate our decay. They want to complete our transformation to become purely crystalline beings." James was about to respond when a new sound echoed through the chamber, a high-pitched resonance that made the crystals around them vibrate in sympathy. Lyra's form went rigid with alarm. "We've been discovered," she said. "The purists, they're sealing the chamber." The entrance they had used was already closing, crystal growing across it like rapidly forming ice. But James had spotted something else, a pattern in the equations flowing across the heart's surface that looked eerily familiar. The decay isn't random, he said, moving closer to the crystal's surface. It's a cascade failure in the quantum matrix, but the pattern— I've seen something like this before in theoretical papers about crystal computing. You understand our technology? Lyra asked, her surprise evident even as she searched for another way out. Not entirely, but enough to recognize a potential solution. James pulled out his portable computer, quickly connecting it to the crystal matrix. Your ancestors built redundancy into the system, quantum backups of the original genetic templates, if we can access those. A new resonance filled the chamber, this one harsh and discordant. Through the crystal walls, they could see figures approaching, purist guards, their forms sharp and angular, devoid of any organic curves. Whatever you're going to do, Lyra said, moving to defend the entrance, do it quickly. James's fingers flew over his computer, translating organic computing protocols into crystal resonance patterns. The heart began to pulse with new frequencies as he accessed deeper and deeper layers of its programming. They were running out of time. The purists were almost through, and with them would come questions James couldn't afford to answer yet. But as the chamber filled with the sound of breaking crystal, he finally found what he was looking for, the original template of life itself, preserved in quantum crystal. Now he just had to figure out how to use it before the purists reached them, and before the decay spreading through the city reached a point of no return. Crystal song. The chamber shook with discordant frequencies as the purist guards attempted to break through. James's fingers danced across his computer interface, translating complex quantum algorithms into something the ancient system could understand. Beside him, Lyra's crystalline form pulsed with defensive energy, creating barriers of pure resonance to slow the intruders. Whatever you're planning, she said, her voice strained, we need it now. Almost there, James muttered. The equations flowing across the heart's surface had changed, responding to his modifications. Your ancestors weren't just brilliant, they were precognitive. They built in protocols for exactly this situation. The first crack appeared in Lyra's barrier, a spiderweb of lines spreading across its surface. Through it, they could see the purist guards, their forms sharp and geometric, devoid of the flowing grace that characterized most luminari. Organic contamination detected, their leader announced, voice harsh with artificial harmonics. The heart must be purified. James finally looked up from his work, a grim smile on his face. You're right about one thing, he said. The heart needs purifying, just not in the way you think. He pressed the final command sequence. The heart erupted with light, patterns of energy cascading through its crystalline structure in ways that made reality itself seem to bend. The purist guards stumbled back, their perfect geometric forms wavering as new frequencies washed over them. What have you done? Their leader demanded, but her voice was changing, becoming more harmonic, less artificial. I accessed the original templates, James explained, watching as the energy spread through the chamber and beyond. Not just the physical patterns, but the quantum resonance that made the first transformation possible. Your ancestors didn't just preserve their genetic code, they preserved their soul. Lyra gasped as the energy reached her, her form shifting subtly. The sharp edges of her crystal structure softened, organic patterns flowing beneath the surface like liquid light. I can feel it, she whispered. The old songs, the memories we lost. The effect spread rapidly through the Crystal City's network, reaching every luminary connected to it. The decay that had been spreading through the crystal matrix began to reverse, but not by becoming more crystalline. Instead, the crystal itself seemed to come alive, pulsing with organic rhythms. This is impossible, the purist leader said, but her voice had lost its harsh edge. Her form, like all the others, was changing, not returning to fully organic matter, but finding a balance between crystal and flesh that their ancestors had originally intended. Not impossible, James corrected. It's evolution. Your ancestors didn't want you to become pure crystal. They wanted you to transcend the boundaries between organic and inorganic life. The decay wasn't a failure of the system, it was a failure to understand its purpose. Through the crystal walls, they could see the transformation spreading across the city. The dull, decaying sections blazed with new life, while the too perfect geometric structures gained organic complexity. It was as if the entire city was awakening from a long dream. But the process wasn't without its dangers. As the quantum resonance rewrote the fabric of Luminari society, some crystals shattered, unable to handle the change. Others merged and reformed in unexpected ways. The city itself seemed to be rebuilding itself according to patterns long forgotten. The council, Lyra suddenly said, they must be informed. This changes everything. Before they could move, however, a new presence filled the chamber. The chief counselor herself appeared, her form already transformed by the quantum resonance. But unlike the others, she seemed unsurprised by the changes. You knew, Jane said, understanding dawning. You knew this would happen. She inclined her head, light flowing through her newly organic crystalline form. We suspected. For generations, certain members of the council have preserved the true history of our people. We knew that someday, someone would come who could help us remember what we were meant to become. The meteor storm, Lyra said. It wasn't just the seventh councilor's faction. You were behind it all along. We needed someone who could see us with fresh eyes, the chief counselor explained. Someone who could understand both the organic and the crystalline. When our long-range sensors detected your ship, Commander Chen, we saw an opportunity. James shook his head, torn between admiration and frustration. You could have just asked for help. Would you have believed us? Would your people have understood? Sometimes the best path forward requires a certain orchestration of circumstances. Before James could respond, new alarms began to sound throughout the city. The transformation was spreading faster than expected, reaching critical systems that maintained the city's environmental controls. The changes are cascading, Lyra said, her form flickering with concern. If we don't stabilize the resonance patterns soon, the entire city could shatter, James finished. He turned to his computer again, but this time with a different purpose. I need access to your atmospheric control systems. If we can't control the transformation directly, maybe we can control the environment it's happening in. The chief counselor stepped forward, placing her hand on the heart's surface. All systems are at your disposal, Commander. Save our people. Again. As James began his race against time, he couldn't help but appreciate the irony. He had come to this crystal world by accident, or so he had thought, only to find himself exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he had been prepared his whole life to do. Now he just had to make sure everyone survived the evolution they had waited generations to achieve. Breaking point. The control center of the crystal spire pulsed with emergency frequencies as James worked frantically to stabilize the cascading transformation. Holographic displays showed the spread of the quantum resonance throughout the city, a wave of change that was simultaneously healing and destructive. Environmental systems at critical levels, Lyra reported, a newly evolved form shifting between crystalline and organic states as she interfaced with the city's network. The transformation is affecting our atmospheric processors. Of course it is, James muttered, his fingers flying over both his computer and the crystal controls. Your entire civilization is built on crystal technology. We're not just changing your people, we're changing your infrastructure. The chief counselor stood at the center of the chamber, her form radiating calm authority despite the crisis. The outer sectors are reporting successful transformations, but the inner city, she gestured to a display showing dangerous energy buildups in the city's core. The concentration of crystal matrices is too high there, James explained. Too many systems, too much data, too many interconnected resonances. It's creating a feedback loop. A violent tremor shook the spire, sending crystalline dust raining from the ceiling. Through the transparent walls, they could see sections of the city shifting, structures realigning themselves as the organic patterns asserted themselves over geometric perfection. "Commander," a new voice called. Sarah, the chief scientist, rushed into the chamber. Her form had also evolved, but she moved with purpose rather than uncertainty. "The data you requested from the ancient archives, I found it." James quickly scanned the information streaming across his display. "This confirms what I suspected. The original transformation wasn't meant to be permanent. Your ancestors designed the system to evolve over time, adapting to changes in your star's radiation." "But we stopped evolving," Lyra said, understanding dawning in her crystalline eyes. "We became so focused on perfecting our crystal forms that we forgot how to change." Another tremor, stronger than the last, rocked the spire. Warning signals flashed across every display as new energy readings spiked in the city's core. "The power core," Sarah gasped. "The quantum resonance is affecting the fusion containment fields." James's blood ran cold. The luminary had mastered crystal-based fusion power, containing stellar energies within quantum matrices. If those containment fields failed, "We need to shut it down," he said, already moving toward the core controls. "Impossible," the chief counselor stated. "The core powers everything: environmental systems, resonance networks, the heart itself. Without it, we die." "If we don't shut it down, everyone dies," James countered. "The quantum resonance is destabilizing the containment fields. When they fail, this entire city becomes ground zero for a fusion explosion." As if to emphasize his point, the spire shook again, and this time the crystal walls themselves began to sing, a rising tone that set everyone's nerves on edge. "There has to be another way," Lyra insisted. "The ancestors wouldn't have designed a system that could destroy us." James stared at the displays, his mind racing. The equations, the patterns, the very structure of luminary society, it all connected. Then it hit him. "They didn't," he said slowly. "They designed a system that could save us, but only if we were willing to take the final step." He turned to the chief counselor. "You need to evacuate the inner city, now." "What are you planning, Commander?" "Your ancestors built redundancy into everything, including your power systems. The fusion core isn't just providing energy, it's maintaining the separation between crystal and organic states. If we shut it down properly, the transformation completes itself," Sarah finished, her scientific mind following his logic. "But the power loss will be temporary," James assured them. "The new hybrid forms your people are evolving into, they're not just aesthetic changes. They're becoming living fusion reactors, capable of generating and containing their own power." The chief counselor's form pulsed with surprise. "You mean your ancestors didn't just want you to survive the radiation, they wanted you to master it, to become beings of both matter and energy, organic and crystalline, able to power your own civilization." Another violent tremor emphasized the urgency of their situation. The chief counselor made her decision. "Begin the evacuation," she ordered. "All citizens are to move to the outer sectors immediately." As the evacuation orders rang through the city's resonance network, James turned back to the controls. "I'll need to stay here to manage the shutdown sequence. The timing has to be perfect." "I'm staying with you," Lyra declared, her form stabilizing into its new hybrid state. "As am I," Sarah added. "You'll need both scientific insight and crystal interface capabilities." The chief counselor nodded. "Guide our people to their true destiny, Commander. We will ensure the evacuation proceeds quickly." As she left, James began the complex process of preparing the fusion core for shutdown. Through the crystal walls, they could see streams of luminary flowing out of the inner city, their forms flickering between states as they moved to safety. "How long do we have?" Lyra asked, monitoring the containment field readings. "Minutes, maybe less," James replied. "When I initiate the shutdown sequence, we'll have exactly 30 seconds to get out before the quantum cascade reaches critical mass." Sarah's form pulsed with concern. "And if we're not clear in time?" James managed a grim smile. Then we get to test your new hybrid form's durability much sooner than planned. The rising tone from the crystal walls had become almost unbearable now, and cracks were beginning to appear in the less stable sections. Everything they had worked for, everything the luminary might become, depended on what happened in the next few minutes. James took a deep breath and placed his hands on the crystal controls. Ready? Laura and Sarah moved to their positions, their forms resonating in harmony. Ready. Then let's wake up your people, for real this time. Bridge between stars. The shutdown sequence initiated with a sound like a crystal cathedral shattering. Energy cascaded through the city's networks in waves of light and resonance as James, Lyra, and Sarah worked in perfect synchronization to contain the reaction. Field strength at 60% and falling, Sarah reported, her hybrid form pulsing with concentrated energy. Quantum cascade approaching critical threshold. James's fingers danced across both crystal controls and his computer interface, orchestrating the controlled collapse of systems that had maintained luminary civilization for generations. Redirecting power to containment buffers. Lyra, I need you to stabilize the resonance patterns. Lyra's form blazed with effort as she channeled the wild energies flowing through the crystal networks. The patterns are holding, but barely. Something's happening to the quantum matrix. Through the crystal walls, they could see the transformation accelerating across the evacuated inner city. Crystal structures that had stood for centuries began to pulse with organic rhythms, their perfect geometric patterns dissolving into fluid, living architecture. 20 seconds until total core shutdown, James announced. We need to move. But before they could leave their stations, a new resonance filled the chamber. Deep, ancient, and powerful. The heart, connected to every crystal system in the city, had begun to sing. It's not just a song, Sarah gasped, her scientific detachment giving way to wonder. It's code, the original transformation sequence, but evolved, completed. The sound grew, harmonics building upon harmonics until reality itself seemed to vibrate in sympathy. James watched in amazement as Lyra and Sarah's forms shifted, the last artificial constraints falling away as they achieved their final intended state. Beings of crystal and flesh, energy and matter, perfectly unified. 10 seconds, James shouted over the rising symphony. We need to go now. They ran, their footsteps echoing through corridors that were themselves awakening to new life. Behind them, the fusion core's containment fields began to fail, not with the catastrophic explosion they had feared, but with a controlled release of energy that flowed into the transformed crystal matrices of the city itself. They barely made it to the safety threshold when the final shutdown occurred. A wave of quantum resonance swept through the entire city, and for a moment, everything went silent. Then, like a flower blooming in accelerated time, the city transformed. The rigid spires softened and flowed, crystal and organic matter merging in ways that defied traditional physics. The luminary who had evacuated to the outer sectors found themselves completing their own transformations, each one becoming a unique fusion of matter and energy. It's beautiful, Lyra whispered, watching her people evolve into what they were always meant to be. James checked his readings, a smile spreading across his face. And stable. The quantum resonance has found its equilibrium. Your people are generating their own power now, just as your ancestors intended. Sarah's form pulsed with scientific excitement. More than that, look. She pointed to where the transformed city was already beginning to grow, new structures emerging organically from the merged crystal organic matrix. We're not just stable, we're evolving, adapting, creating. The chief counselor approached, her evolved form radiating serene authority. Commander Chen, you have done more than save our people. You have awakened us to our true purpose. I just helped you remember what you already knew, James replied. Your ancestors left you all the tools you needed. Sometimes it takes an outside perspective to see the patterns. Perhaps, the chief counselor said, that was their greatest wisdom. They knew we would need bridges between stars, between different forms of life, to achieve our full potential. She turned to address her transformed people. The age of isolation is over. It is time for the Luminari to rejoin the galactic community. Speaking of which, James said, pulling up data on his computer, I'm detecting multiple ships entering the system. Looks like the Terran exploration course finally noticed something was wrong when the Hawking didn't check in. Laura's form brightened. Will you stay? Help us establish contact with your people. There's still so much we could learn from each other. James looked around at the transformed city, at the beings of crystal and starlight who had become something entirely new, yet somehow more true to themselves than ever before. Actually, I think we're going to learn from each other. Your transformation isn't just a solution to your own survival. It's a glimpse of what's possible when different forms of life work together, evolve together. The approaching ships were visible now, descending through the crystal-laden atmosphere. But unlike James's crashed arrival, they found a city ready to welcome them, a civilization reborn through the fusion of organic and crystalline life, of human ingenuity and luminary wisdom. Besides, James added with a smile, someone needs to explain to my superiors why I crashed an escape pod into a crystal city and helped transform an entire civilization. Perhaps, the chief counselor suggested, her form resonating with subtle humor, we should begin with a simpler explanation. Sometimes the most profound discoveries come not from seeking perfection, but from embracing change. As the first contact teams from Earth approached the transformed crystal city, James Chen stood with his Luminari friends, ready to bridge two worlds. He had come seeking new life among the stars, and instead had helped an ancient people remember how to truly live. The crystal city sang its new song to the stars, a harmony of organic and inorganic, of past and future, of ending and beginning. And in that song was a promise. This was just the beginning of humanity's role in the greater symphony of life among the stars. End.